If the camera's running, what else can I tell you about?
I wouldn't mind hearing the intro to you and Harry's relationship after that article came out. That was pretty interesting.
Okay.
Show that picture again.
Sure.
I didn't catch that. The camera was off when you started talking. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Okay.
I had no idea that's how he found it. Because I
This
know you had gone from the window displays to color forms.
Well, no. No. I did Boutique Fantastique, the music boxes and things
After window displays?
Yeah.
Okay, you're right.
Yeah. I did them for probably 6 years. Easily 6 years.
Boutique.
It was very, very humble, very humble. I had no desire to be wealthy. After my seemingly relatively affluent childhood, all I aspired to was genuine, not make-believe, but genuine, real, not poverty, but modestly eking out an income. And the more modest, the happier I was.
Can you explain that?
Oh, I can explain it, certainly I can. Just let me just concentrate on what I'm doing here for 1 second. Okay, I know what I'm getting there.
That's a subject that's always interested me. You see so many people putting their effort and energy into finding happiness in money.
Well, there's a saying that I guide my life by: money has no odor, but poverty stinks.
Huh.
And that pretty much sums it up. The color forms years. The story is really all there. This is a portrait of Harry, by the way. Okay. Introduction. This is it. This is a card we made for Boutique Fantastique to advertise it, and this is the article in the thing. And if you, I see it's not going to get any bigger. Anyway, that's the article that appeared in the newspaper that day, and the very same day, Harry called me up, and he captured my imagination immediately. He really was a wizard.
What did he call specifically for? Just to talk?
He called
about what you guys were doing?
anything that captured his imagination, that he thought might lead to something that would be of something he could get involved with. He would pursue it. And he was there just looking for something, and he found it in me. And it was crazy because, you know, here was this obviously brilliant individual. I mean, he was no dummy at all. He was really, really smart. And here he's devoting so much attention to me. And I had never in my entire life had a conversation with my father that lasted more than a few sentences, because we just had nothing to talk to. To talk to my father was like a conversation with the barber, only, you know, I hated going to the barber shop because they'd always try to talk about sports or something. Hey, what do you think of them Tigers? They'd say to me, and oh, Christ, does he mean the baseball team? I mean, I was really major out of it, but here's this Harry Kislevitz, a seemingly brilliant person, who's mining my head for toy ideas, and to our mutual amazement, it turned out there were a lot of them there. And another instance of seeking and finding where you'd never, without some reason to do it, you'd never look. I'm absolutely convinced that if people ever ask themselves questions that had never been asked before, they might just find out they know the answers, or have the skills, or have the stuff all stored up there. Most people lead their lives, and fate never poses the question. But if you suddenly were in a situation where you needed a job and someone offered you a job as a chef, for instance, you might find out that you were a great chef. You just might find that out. You'd go your entire life and never discover it otherwise.
Or at least discover that you enjoy it, and you didn't know
Yeah.
you enjoyed it, and that could lead you to...
Exactly. Anyway, Harry called me up, and that started a relationship that continued at least for 6 years, and we talked to each other on the phone every single day.
Even on the weekend, even on your...
Oh, anytime. Harry was he operated on his own, in his own universe, in his own time frame. And he never stopped to think, was it inconvenient? So he would call whenever he felt like calling. It could even be late at night or any time like this. Well, there was a guy when later I was the art director at Color Forms, and there was a guy he hired from Israel, a guy named Zvi. And Zvi was a real staunch Israeli. He had all the traits of an Israeli, a certain toughness and a certain whatever. And he didn't take any nonsense, and none from Harry. And Harry calls him one day on Christmas and says to him, Zvi, I'm so glad you're Jewish because I can talk to you on Christmas because you're not, everybody else is celebrating Christmas. Zvi said, no, that's not so. He says, I still celebrate this holiday. This is a day off for me, Harry. I don't want to talk today. He didn't take any nonsense, but that was Harry. He wouldn't give it a second thought. He'd call you anytime. And I lapped it up. And the crazy thing is, we only had one telephone in the apartment. And it was hanging in the hall at the front door, and it was this tiny little vestibule. And I would start talking to Harry there, and I'd end up on the floor, because the conversations would go on for hours on end, as we thought of every possible toy.
That's kind of cool, though, to have that kind of collaborator.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. This strange person who I never met, and consequently, as I put on my website, he could be anything to me I wanted him to be, but most of all, he was a father figure. Although he was only 10 years my senior and had 6 children of his own, he represented kind of, had a father I could talk to.
Wow. That's impressive. I'm also curious, around this time you were saying your goal was the more modest, the more happy you were. If you can explain more in the detail, I'd love to understand that better.
Okay. Well, let me just say this, Eric. I'm not complaining. I had a fabulous life. I was one of the luckiest people on earth, and I'm fully aware of it. I'm never miserable, never unhappy, unless someone steals my outer spaceman. Oh. But seriously, I never feel sorry for myself. I really always feel lucky because I was born into parents that gave me anything I desired. That was a plus. But of course, I had absolutely nothing in common with them. And that was maybe a plus too, maybe, I don't know. But being so, I would say, grotesquely oversized. And, well, I'll prove it to you. I will prove it to you right now. Recollections of a Toy Collector, competitive fading memories. Camp Mahia. Where is it? Okay, here I am at 11 years old in Camp Mahia. This is me. These are my normal cabin mates. This kid who is normal size, I look like I'm a ventriloquist. Seriously, I was baby Huey. I was 6'3" then. I grew another 1.25 inches after that, and every bit of 260 pounds. And the only thing I wanted more than anything at all was to be absolutely ordinary. I didn't want anyone to know that my father was obsessed with Cadillacs. He had these goddamn Cadillac cars. That to him spelt success, and which was fine. But my father was like a great big overgrown kid, and he had a naivete about him. And eventually, when he was really ill and he couldn't drive anymore, he had to hire a couple so the guy could drive him. And of course, that changed my life completely, because I absolutely love these people. They were my family. And Charles loved driving my dad. And he was so chuffed, he went and bought himself a chauffeur's cap. And and my father probably never even noticed he had a chauffeur's cap. But Charles loved playing this role. Well, on some days, Charles would drive me to school in this Cadillac, excuse the expression, and drive me in the goddamn Cadillac to school. And I only had to say once, "Charles, let's go this way." I said, "And let me out here 3.5 blocks from school." I only had to say it once. He said, "Sure, Mel, okay, you know." And he'd never wear that hat with me in the car. No way that was going to happen. And that's what we would do. I would walk the rest of the way to school. And I managed to make it through 4 years of high school with only my 3 or 4 friends ever saw those Cadillacs or came to my house. Nobody ever knew about them, because I wanted to be small. I wanted to be not wealthy. I wanted to be genuinely, no good pretending, you have to be genuinely poor. It can't just be you can't just pretend. You have to be really, truly, genuinely small, genuinely poor, genuinely all these things. I wanted to be all these things that I could, just ordinary. And of course, Detroit in the 1950s was all about conformity. It was this enormous force that was everywhere. It was it's like gravity. You couldn't see it, but you knew it was there. My friends were never the Jewish kids. My friends were always the typical American. Eddie Goodman, for instance, a regular guy, had a paper route. Now, did I want to go get a paper route? No. I wasn't going to be so disingenuous to, Eddie was genuinely needed to get a paper route to get. All I had to do was ask my parents for pocket money, and I got it. So what am I going to do? Play the paper route? I don't need to. But my father would never give me money. He always did, but he'd never give me money without telling me that he had to sell newspapers when he was 4 years old on the streets of New York. I've heard that story 1,000 times, 1,000 times. But other than that, we didn't have very many conversations. The one thing he used to say to me that drove me absolutely crazy, I was always working on a project. There was always something on the face of this earth every single day that hadn't been there that morning. I was making model kits. I tied fishing flies. Never went fishing in my life. I tied fishing flies just because I liked the little fuzzy bits of squirrel fur and feathers and stuff you could see for sale at the Jailheads and Company. I made models back when they were made of wood, model airplanes, model battleships. Never stopped. I was always making something. And I was always making it out in the rumpus room on this incredibly amazing glass table. It was this thick, the glass, dark green like a Coca-Cola bottle, and the legs were 2 slabs of glass with wood things between them, and another over there, and this must have weighed 600 pounds. And they let me use that table for my workbench, and so I could take over the rumpus room, because it wasn't even part of the house. And my father would come out, and he would inevitably say to me, "What's that supposed to be?" And I would inevitably say, "It's not supposed to be anything. It is a scale model of the Boulder Dam," or whatever thing I was working on at the time.
So the modesty that you're talking about in income was just that you were a regular guy, now you are fitting in with everybody else.
I just wanted to be ordinary. I never wanted to be wealthy. To me, it's something I want to be I want to be just ordinary. That's all I wanted to be.
See, when you were saying that you were making a modest living, I thought it was the money wasn't as important as doing you were free to do what you enjoyed, and you weren't tied down to, I got to make a certain amount of money kind of thing. That was.
I liked making so little money that it controlled what I was able to do. That it was genuinely, genuinely playing at not having. I loved that state of affairs. Well, all that changed, by the way, when bloody comic characters came into my life. I was so fine with $200 a week I thought I was in cloud nine with Harry Kislevitz giving me that money. That suited me just fine. That was a lot of money to me back then. And the year I lived in Paris, I was in a budget. My mother sent me begrudgingly little bit of my money, $250 a month of my money, which was more than enough. My hotel room, I was loving it so much. My hotel room was $30 a month. Can you believe that?
Jeez. What came with that?
I did.
Was it like an efficiency?
It was, Paris was full of residential hotels. They weren't meant for overnight stays. People lived there by the month. And what came with it? Well, what came with it was a radiator that was this big square that in the dead of winter you could sit on it, and it was about body temperature. A great big double bed that was a straw mattress on a wire frame, a thick piece of straw like that. I pulled it out from this ledge along one wall and put it in front of the window. The huge French window that was every bit of 12 foot tall.
Cool.
And it opened into two doors like that. And I would put the bed in front of the window. The room itself was not very big. It was probably 12 foot wide by 15 feet long. It had a bidet and a sink in one corner. There was a toilet out in the hall.
Anything for making food or storing food?
No.
Wow. So you had to eat every meal out?
Oh, you ate every meal out, yeah. And to heat it in the wintertime, everybody there in France, everyone I knew, there was no heat to speak of whatsoever. They did this thing called brûlage, which I guess roughly translates to burning. And you get this shallow tin tray, and you'd buy these bottles of flammable liquid that looked like they were in a bottle of, you get them at the charcuterie, it looked like they're a bottle of lemonade with a porcelain cap and a rubber thing and a metal clasp to close it. You'd pour about 1.5 inches of this into that pan, and the ceilings were very high. The ceiling must have been 13, 14 foot high. And you'd throw a match in that direction, and this great pillar of fire would rise right to the ceiling. And then a second later it was gone, leaving nothing but little bits of blue flame dancing on the edge of the platter. And that would heat that room up for an hour. And you could make it through the winter by occasional brûlage. And I was using it like a studio. I had a glass palette and wasn't using turpentine, I was using gasoline. You'd go to the gas station and get petrol. And I always had this open jar of petrol sitting on my palette. It's a miracle I didn't immolate myself there in that room. But I was loving it. God, I loved it there. And that's, what did you get for your $30 a month? You got that space, you got running water, and you got one set of great big linen sheets, great big heavy, almost burlap, double bed sheets.
And how much was food a month?
Oh, not much, not much.
No more than 30? I can't imagine having to eat every meal out.
Well, I only ate 2 meals a day.
Oh.
And I ate, Eunice and I went out to lunch and breakfast and dinner every day. And we went to the place on the corner called Le Petit Source, the little source. I guess a source was a stream or something. And we would have the same thing. For breakfast, we'd have something called œuf frite, which is an egg on French fries. For dinner, we had steak frite, which was a scrawny little piece of meat on top of the same stack of frites, of French fries, except the meat had been dipped into the French fry fat and cooked in the same grease as the French fries and laid on the top. And we ate the same thing, and it came with a tumbler, like this, a tumbler like this full of wine. And that was it, that's what we'd eat. Food didn't cost anything. What cost was cigarettes were cheap. I smoked like a chimney, and the what I'd been smoking in Detroit was probably Marlboros, and in France they were like $1 a pack, foreign cigarettes, but for like 30 cents a pack, equivalent of 30 cents, you got Gauloises, which were the strongest French cigarettes. And I smoked those goddamn things in butts all over my room. Anything sufficed as an ashtray.
Were you doing any art in France?
Oh yeah, I was doing these great big paintings.
Of
stuff.
Just anything.
Stuff, yeah. Actually, the curious thing, I wonder if I could find this. I did a painting of the little shop that's so fascinating to me down the road, and when I was living in the old loft in New York, and again that was delightful. That was $100 a month, that loft, and I was making $100 a week from Austin Display, and this guy from Detroit came and visited us, and I sold him this painting. And 3 weeks ago, I got a call. He died several years ago. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a man in Detroit who tracked me down. He had the painting. And I don't know if he was trying to sell it to me. He said he had an art gallery. And he sent me a not-so-good picture of the painting. And I said, could you send me a better one? And he said he would. And he never replied. And I wrote him again, and he never replied. It wasn't bad, actually. No, I used to try to do these enormous canvases. Well, there's actually one from the basement I did story that's on this website. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was huge. But gosh, I loved it there. That was just my lifestyle.
Did you ever go back to the shop? Did you speak French, or you spoke English pretty fluently?
I spoke digital French.
Which is what?
I said two things. I could say two things. Combien pour ça, which means how much is that? Pointing at whatever's in the showcase at the charcuterie. And then I would say, je veux un, I want one of that. Je veux un de ça. So I could say, how much is it? And well, I'll take one.
Seriously, that's it? That's all you?
That was about all I needed. All I needed. You never, the French would have nothing to do with you. They despised Americans. But fortunately, there were like cafes were strictly for English-speaking people, and so I met a real group of great friends and had a wonderful time. Wonderful time.
Were you working or going to school?
No, I just went over there.
hanging out.
I just went over there. I mean, this was, well, first of all, this was the heart of, this was the prime heart of the center, the epicenter, and the year of the Beat generation. And by default, I was sort of a member of that group, but quite by accident.
How long were you there for?
A year.
So you really like a year vacation almost.
Well, yeah, I would say would have been there 2 years if it wasn't for a variety of things, including meeting Eunice and whatever. Oh no, I remember why now. I remember why. Yeah, boy, it's all coming back to me. I would have stayed there 2 years. I had enough money for 2 years. I was loving it. I had just met Eunice, and we were together for like 6 weeks. One day we were lying in bed, which is all we ever did. I mean, and got a letter from my mother, and she says, "You have to come home, sonny boy. I've lost everything. All your father's property is gone. I'm going to have to scrub floors. You have to come home and get a job and support me." And
your father had passed at this point.
yeah, and that's where I was in the doghouse, because he died a year before I went to Paris, and that's like leaving my mother in the lurch. But my mother was leading a fine life, playing canasta 8 times a week with the girls, and no different than when my father was alive. And still had 2 Cadillacs in the driveway, and still had the maid coming in 3 days a week. But she wrote me this letter. She was destitute. She'd lost everything, and you had to come home. So like an idiot, I did. And not realizing that if I went back to Detroit to get a job which would pay me less than she lost playing cards every week, that I'd immediately go into the Army. I'd immediately be drafted. And I was getting out of the military because I was signed into this art school in France, which was $10 a month. And I got a letter that got me out of the draft. And I loved it there. I went every day, did figure drawing for about 2 weeks. And I made the mistake of storing my drawings there at a place where you stored your drawings. And they were all stolen. And I later realized that if your drawings, I should have taken it as a compliment, if anybody's drawings were passably decent enough to sell in cafes, these girls used to go around and sell art drawings to tourists. So someone stole all my drawings, so I never went back to the art school.
I got that compliment once in high school. Somebody stole a robot sculpture
Yeah.
that I had made. I thought it was so great.
Yeah.
I thought it was so cool. Somebody stole that sculpture.
Well, it's certainly,
I was like, "Oh, you must be so angry." I said, "No, not at all."
certainly a backhanded way to get a compliment, isn't it? I didn't take it as easy as you did.
I was as big as you in high school, so that would have been
Well, you must have been really tall. Yeah, you're from a different generation.
yeah.
You would have been a great friend to have in Detroit. My God, I would have felt tiny.
Like the Twin Towers.
God. I can't really tell you the story. Expect to listen to his sympathy.
Oh no.
Or,
It was probably a lot shyer than you were and just as tall.
clearly you were taller. But you come from a different part of the country, and I've noticed that overweight people, for instance, tend to be kind of loud and gregarious when they're brought up in the East, but shy and reclusive when they're brought up in the Midwest.
Yeah, sure.
And so I was brought up in the Midwest, but so I never went back to the art school again, but I continued to pay my $10 a month because I wanted to get out of the Army for sure. And when I got back to Detroit, so I left. I went home. My friend Bob Grosvenor went back with me. He was ready to leave. And Eunice promised to come stay with me in America as soon as I could send her the money and as soon as she could get a visa. So I left under that expectation, and Bob Grosvenor left, and his girlfriend Verda was already back in the United States. She was there waiting for us at the dock. We came back on the Queen Mary, and my mother was there waiting with my aunt in the Cadillac, and so there was big hugs and kisses with Verda, and I heard about it all the way home for 800 miles to Detroit, and for the first 700 miles of it, all I heard was I had just kissed a black girl. And I don't know where that came from, because I never heard one word of bigotry ever spoken or thought in my life. Where my mother got that from, I don't know. But I thought, Jesus Christ, I'm home again. France was so incredibly different. I was home one day, and I figured it out. The Cadillacs were still in the driveway. My mother was not one penny poorer than the day I left. The maid was still coming in 3 days a week to scrub the floors my mother claimed she was going to have to scrub. And I was out of there the next day in Ann Arbor, Michigan, getting myself an apartment and taking my mother up on her offer to pay my way all the while I was in school. So I'd been to school about, in total, 3.5 years. 2.5 years. I'd had 2.5 years of college. 1 year at Michigan, 1.5 years at Pratt. And I think I've told you before, college these days is ridiculous. But the tuition to go to the Ivy League school of University of Michigan was $350.
A semester?
A semester. Wow. And we had sticker shock because Pratt was $600 a semester. Today it would be $60,000. Ridiculous.
For half the quality of the classes.
Exactly, where they brainwash you in the process and teach you proper pronouns. So the next day I'm back with my 2.5 years of art school. Well, 1 year at Pratt, and 1 year at Michigan, 1.5 years at Pratt, where I got, which was a real art school, where I got enough art credits for a full 4 years as an art major at the University of Michigan. And then I got full credit for the year I didn't go to school in France. So I already had more credits than I needed to graduate. But I had to be in residence 1 year, take a speech course, take one art history course, and one language course. So I was signed up for school the next day, and I was in summer school, so I was home for exactly 1 day. And after seeing me for 1 day, my mother was glad to see the back of me. So
you go back to Paris?
I'm surprised I didn't. Yes, that should never occurred to me.
Picked that ticket up and got the hell out of town.
God, well, it was really a dead end there. I spent another year there, and then what would I do, I guess? So I took the opportunity to have my mother pay for 1 more year of school. And Eunice did arrive a couple months later. It took quite a while to get visas and everything. But she arrived, and I continued then. I continued on my mother's money to get $250 a month, which was, again, I know groceries were only $25 a week back then. And so it was all good times. And she got pregnant and had Samantha, and the university paid for it. It was quite amazing.
Wow.
That was like, wow. You got full medical benefits when you went to college.
Wow.
Incredible. They paid for the birth and everything.
Wow. That's wonderful.
No, but back to what I was saying, Eric, about being lucky, the way I would sum up in terms of ability, God gave me just enough ability to make a living painlessly. And that's a huge, great gift.
Explain.
Well, doing artwork, which I did for all my life, one way or another, was always a pleasure to me. I was getting paid for doing something I essentially enjoyed doing. So even though I was a workaholic and couldn't stop, it was curious because my partner Mike Strauss and I were working on weenies together, and I simply never stopped working on them because my whole life had been working speculation for hoping something would happen, a royalty or whatever, but never by the hour. Mm-hmm. And Mike's life was by the hour. Mm. So he was being paid for every hour he spent. He was making some money. Every hour he spent working on weenies, he was losing money. He could have been doing the work on anything else and get paid for it. Mm. So he turned out to be a rotten partner. I had to really drag him along through the whole process. And it became rather grotesque because I was the guy who handed him the jobs. So finally, out of sheer meanness and desperation, I had no other choice, but his jobs simply stopped. They dried up. And until he did his part of the presentation, and when it was finished, suddenly he was inundated with work again. He was an amazingly good artist. Everything he did was delicious. It was always late, and I mean really, really late. It made it very difficult for me to drag him along without getting myself in hot water.
Something about super talented artists and lateness, although you didn't have that problem, people, but it's like some people just cannot get it together.
Well, I'll give you my simple, blunt, simple answer to that. Some people simply think their time is more valuable than anyone else's. Hmm. It's essentially lack of consideration for another person. Irresponsibility. There's no better way you can. I referred to him as the late great Mike Strauss because he was always late, but it was always great.
That's funny.
Of course, he's late now. He passed away, a month or so ago, 2 months ago.
Jeez. Were you there?
I was there. I didn't tell you this. I ended up, I hadn't spoken to him for a long time. When we left Colorforms, he didn't call me again for 20 years. So he really lived a life of working day and night. He loved his wife was fabulous, and they really had a fabulous love story relationship, no doubt about it. So he had 4 kids, so he really didn't need buddies, you know what I mean? Right. But so when he was in the hospital recently with a stroke, and he lay there for 3 weeks, I guess, and unconscious, they called me to tell me, and somehow or other his son had created this fantasy that maybe if I was to go there and say, Mike, you're late. You're late for the assignment. We have to finish this tomorrow.
Is that really what he wanted you to say?
Yeah, he really wanted me. He really thought that. You talk about grasping at straws.
That's really tough.
It was really,
Did you do it?
Of course I did it.
Oh God.
Not only did I do it.
That's surreal.
Well, you talk about surreal, Eric. Not only did I do it, but nobody stopped me. Nobody stopped me from walking into the intensive care unit. No one said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I was able to go right up into the thing, open up the door, walk in, go down the corridor, and enter Mike's room where he was hooked up to machines like you wouldn't believe. No.
Oh,
I was the only one there.
Oh,
and I was there alone with him for an hour, trying to carry on a conversation in this lame attempt to get to see if this magic that they were expecting would happen, would work. And I'm never good at conversations in general, let alone one-way conversation with somebody who's in a coma.
That's
And
that's real tough.
it was really a difficult hour, I got to tell you. And you talk about surreal, very surreal. And like 2 weeks later, he passed away. And his wife is a lovely person, beautiful person, and she has a wonderful job at a Montessori school as a psychologist or something. They were the perfect family, the perfect Hallmark family. They were snatched out of high school by Hallmark greeting cards and transported to Kansas City, where they lived in the Hallmark life and the Hallmark world, and all their friends were artists. And
wow, that's pretty cool.
it was very nice, and everything was taken care of, their medical, their everything. They lived in this ideal community of artists.
Wow.
And they left it for the cold, cold New York State, where no one gives a damn and cares enough to send the very best. But they moved here, and when they were living there, they literally celebrated every Hallmark holiday. They were so into it. And they had this perfect, idealistic, all-American Hallmark marriage. You know, I would make fun of it, but it really was something awesome, really. Every day for lunch, she would make him soup and a sandwich. I swear, Campbell's tomato soup and a peanut butter sandwich, or maybe a tuna fish sandwich. And he would work way, way, way late into every night. And he worked down the cellar in this dreadful, unheated laundry room. He had this Cocker Spaniel called Pupcake. And so he was always, Pupcake, come on, Pupcake, kissing it on the mouth and things like that. And he was so funny. I got such a bang out of him. I thought about him yesterday when the woman handing out the snacks at the Sam's Club gave me half a sandwich and said, there you go, young man. And I thought of Mike Strauss. He was so incredibly charming or so he thought, and so incredibly disingenuous. Everything he said was exactly the opposite of what he was thinking. So if he saw some old timer who really looked like he had one foot in the grave, Mike would say, well, how you doing, young fella? He talked with this Midwestern accent. Or if some woman was really what would commonly be referred to as plain, he'd say, well, how are you, good looking? And then, so I was always cracking up because whatever he was saying, he obviously was thinking exactly the opposite.
That would irritate me to death.
When we were up there at the Weenies thing, the presentation, that marketing meeting where they were doing the licensing, Mike was strutting around like a rooster. He really was lapping it up. I was hovering in the corner, trying to be inconspicuous and hoping no one from Color Forms might see me there or something. So here we are. It's the end of a perfect day. The sun is setting. Christmas isn't far away. And I can't believe it's 2019. It's 50 years ago to the day that the outer spacemen were enjoying their heyday. And my dear friend Gary Schaeffer, who's here with us today, was opening up his own outer spaceman underneath the Christmas tree. So what better way to end this video than with a few words from my dear friend Gary? If it wasn't for him, the outer spaceman would have sunk into oblivion many years ago. So Gary, take it away, and thank you.
I'm Gary Schaeffer. Almost 30 years ago, it was October of 1991, I stumbled into booth 2165 at the Atlantic City Antique Show. Not knowing where I was or what I was doing, I haphazardly ended up in front of a glass showcase, observing what was sitting inside. I was immediately transported back in time through some time and space continuum to a place in Brooklyn many, many years earlier, where I sat on my grandmother's gold carpet at 425 East 2nd Street in front of her plastic-covered gold couch, and distinctly remembered breaking open the packaging to Zodiac, which was one of the original 7 outer spacemen. And right behind Zodiac was Commander Comet, right behind Commander Comet was Electron Plus, and right behind him was Astronautilus. And I don't know where I got these toys or who bought them from me. I remember sitting on the carpet in utter elation as to considering that I was the luckiest boy in the world for having the best toys in the world. I played with those toys endlessly forever. It was 1969. Man had just landed on the moon, and somewhere around that time I had received these toys either as a gift or my mother purchased them, I'm not sure. But I then remember going to camp, both in 1969 and 1970, and somewhere along the line these toys disappeared. I hadn't seen them until booth 2165. And I was staring at what was a fully carded set of the original 7 outer spacemen, as well as something I could not discern. I could not understand what this velvet-covered board with these plastic-looking figures I had never seen before. Somehow they were so foreign, yet somehow they were so resonant in my mind as something that I knew what it was. And a voice behind me said, "Do you know what you're looking at, son?" And I turned around, and it was this man with a cigar in his mouth, with a big beard. And it was at that moment that I had met Mel Birnkrant, the man who would decisively change so much of my future and my time here on Earth. It turns out that this man was the author and the creator of what I thought was the greatest toys in the world, which in 1991, it was almost a full 20 years later, that I had completely forgotten all about the outer spacemen. Yet somehow, some way, I was drawn into this booth and I saw them, and who knew that almost 30 years later I'd be sitting here on camera in front of Mel Birnkrant, sitting in Mouse Heaven, talking about what I still believe to be as the greatest toys in the world. My relationship with Mel varied with tremendous ups and downs through the years. It was very hard to penetrate Mouse Heaven and even gain Mel as a friend. And it took a very, very long time until he would truly listen to me when I said, "You are my father." And today I enjoy a relationship unlike I've ever known in my life. And it's not just the fact that it's the outer spaceman which brought us together originally. It's the fact that this man is the closest man I've ever known to me in my life. And I made a promise many years ago, because while our relationship grew, through the years, I insisted, begged, pleaded, tortured him to move forward with bringing the outer spaceman back. It wasn't until the late 1990s, 1997, 98, that Mel finally agreed and allowed me to build a business. And it took a lot of money and a lot of time, but we won the day. We got the licenses, we got the registrations, we got the copyrights for the second series, we got the trademarks in place. Tons of lawyers, tons of battles, tons of arguments. Zorbitron was going to be the new name of Orbitron because we couldn't get Orbitron, it was taken. But through ingenuity and luck, I was able to have such lawyers that cost so much money that we were able to score Orbitron. So we then went forward and created the graphic novel, which Mel still to this day won't leave me alone about because he thought it was such a piece of garbage. But it was the response to the graphic novel that introduced us through a New York Comic Con experience to the Four Horsemen, which led to the first license, which led to the resculpting of the Outer Spaceman, which led to action figures. And through a tremendous series of events, both good and bad, with the Four Horsemen, I sat out because I have zero creativity, and Mel is the most creative person on the planet. So through the years, it was apparent to me that while the outer spacemen are eternal in their design, in their presence, it became quite clear that I was nothing other than a steward taking over from Mel Birnkrant, who was a steward, who takes the stewardship from me, has yet to be discovered. But next year I turn 60, and I've been doing this for 25 years. And at the end of the day, I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in the outer spaceman. I believe that the world needs to see these for what they are, a timeless, limitless brand, event all in its own that transcribes all matter, all art, all science, all technology, and all the boundaries that imagination has. They are timeless. They have been here forever. They will remain forever. They are archetypes of something extraordinary that reminds us all of something we've seen before, yet we're drawn to them because we must play with them. And I'm proud to say that instead of 200 baby boomers when we first started this, I'm proud to say that at this point we have 200,000 people in the database. And the outer spacemen are on every single continent on the planet. We are in sub-Saharan Africa, we are in Central and Eastern Europe, we are in Asia, we are in South America, we are all throughout the UK and Canada. We have 16 pieces in the Russian Federation, we have 7 in North Korea. And we have that because of Mel Birnkrant. And while Mel Birnkrant created them, and the tagline from someone that we know dearly is, if it weren't for Mel, they wouldn't have been made. If it wasn't for me, they'd have been forgotten. Possibly. But I'm a steward. And somebody will pick up the reins well after I'm gone and continue this, because the outer spacemen are timeless. And they were here before Mel and I, and they'll be here after Mel and I. But in summation, I would say this: it's not just a toy. It's giving somebody the imagination and the ability to create something from nothing, using the most simple of ideas and concepts and design, but above all, having fun and being a child again and imagining that there's something beyond the limits of the earth, that there really is something beyond the essence of the Milky Way. And I want to thank Mel from the bottom of my heart. He's a great man, and I owe him the world. And come hell or high water, we will see the outer spaceman on the silver screen, because that was my pledge to him. And even if I have to drag him down the red carpet with an oxygen tank dragging behind him.
Oxygen tanks are on the way, but
well, even if I have to drag his ass down the red carpet with an oxygen tank, he will see the efforts pay off of this extraordinary labor, of this mandate that I chose in which to engage so many years ago. So with that, I bid you a fond farewell, and thank you for the opportunity to tell you my side of the story of the outer spaceman.
Harry, dear, I do love you.